Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Inside the Pod from the Processors and Growers Research Organisation. I'm your host for today, Ben Pike, and I've got my co-presenter with me today, Emily Scaife. Good morning, Emily.
Good morning.
And we've also got with us today a couple of guests. The first is Tom Astill from Bayer Crop Science. Tom, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you for having me.
And we've got Becky Howard from the PGRO. Becky, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks both for joining us. We've got some guests in today because we've got a topic that we wanted to cover around crop protection, and Bayer has just brought a new product to the market, a new insecticide. We thought it was a good opportunity to discuss the wider issues and challenges and opportunities around crop protection, the research and development that goes into it, and of course the registration process. So we've invited Tom on to fill us in a little bit about that and to talk about what Bayer has brought to the market. So perhaps that's a good place for us to kick off. Tom, do you want to start with a bit of an introduction to yourself and your role at Bayer, and perhaps a little bit about Sivanto Prime?
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thanks, Ben. So, I'm Tom Astill. I'm an agronomy services representative. So, my role basically is sort of technical support and identifying sort of positioning for plant protection products in potatoes, pulses, other vegetable crops and fruit. And obviously that's for Bayer. So for Bayer Crop Science, obviously Bayer as a whole has got three divisions, sort of a consumer health, pharmaceuticals, and then the sort of more I suppose more well known to ourselves is the crop science division. And within that there is essentially the crop protection element, so looking at sort of conventional and biopesticides, seeds and traits, to looking sort of particularly at development of new genetics, and then lastly a digital farming program.
So Sivanto Prime, for those growers who haven't come across it before, can you tell us a little bit about actually what it is, what it does, and which crops it's approved for use on?
Yeah, so we're pleased to say that Sivanto Prime is an insecticide that was recently authorised in March this year. It's an insecticide which contains an active substance called fluorophore. It belongs to what is a new mode of action subgroup available for UK growers, which are the butanolides, part of the group 4 insecticides. And yeah, as I said, it's sort of authorised for use as an insecticide. Predominantly, with a spectrum of aphids, and it's authorised in obviously various pulse crops, so combining peas, field beans, vining peas, and then as well as dwarf beans, runner beans, other pulse crops, carrots, potatoes, and sugar beets. So yeah, quite a broad range of sort of pest spectrum and use in a wide range of crops.
I guess the challenge around new products is the development pipeline and how long it takes to discover something in the first place that's worth taking forward, and then obviously the years of development and the tests and trials that has to go into it before you even get to the registration process, which we all know is no walk in the park. Tell us a bit about the development of Sivanto in particular. Do you know how long it's taken to bring the product forward, and have there been bumps in the road or fairly plain sailing?
I guess, there are always challenges with registration of new sort of plant protection products. So on average, it takes about 10 years to go from sort of designing or discovery of the active substance to sort of formulating it as a product, testing it to get it sort of available as a tool for use in field. I guess some of the sort of challenges have been with Brexit in terms of the change of the sort of regulatory system. We've been sort of caught up in that. But otherwise, we have a pretty strong development program and regulatory sort of science team, which have enabled Sivanto Prime to get to market.
And what sort of potential do you think it's got for the UK pulse market? The growers who might be listening to this episode, what do you think the real benefits are in terms of, is it a step up or on what we've got already, or is it an alternative tool that might be used slightly differently to what we've had before? How do you see it?
Yeah, so it's an aphicide. So Sivanto Prime sort of predominantly has contact activity, so some knockdown activity, and also has some translaminar mobility. So can offer about sort of 7 days protection of a crop. This is particularly useful for sort of control of aphids, and obviously they're vectors of virus. On label, we know there is activity on pea aphid, as well as black bean aphid and peach potato aphids. We know that they are all sort of vectors of diseases in pulse crops. And in terms of application, um, in field beans, combining peas, finding peas, they can all sort of Sivanto Prime can be applied from sort of the 2-leaf stage to tendrils. So it can be used quite early on, where there is sort of a gap of insecticide authorizations in some of those crops, in particular combining peas. So particularly, from sort of now onwards, really, well, certainly now from time of recording into May, when aphid flights are certainly starting to increase, it will offer some really good sort of early season knockdown protection. And also, we do know through sort of our own testing and external testing that it has quite favourable selectivity for beneficial predators and parasitoids. So it could integrate quite nicely early on in programs while those levels of predators and parasitoids are quite low in the crop, in that sort of lag phase. So yeah, having a minimal effect on those should be quite complementary in IPM programs.
Obviously, resistance is something that growers are concerned about. How should this be used in order to avoid that? Do you have any specific guidance?
Certainly, yes. So, resistance management is key. Obviously, there are fewer active substances coming through, and we need to really sort of protect what we have. So, obviously, we would always say, follow the IRAC guidelines, but actually, more it's easy to say that. What are those? So, firstly, always use insecticides in an IPM program, so stack with, or a foundation of sort of cultural controls. So monitoring pest populations is critical, and identify, correct identification of the pest, apply thresholds, and then actually more specifically for, say, Sivanto Prime, always use at the full dose rate, so full label dose rates, that's 0.125 litres a hectare, can only be used once per season or once per crop, and always, try and rotate with other modes of action if required, if further insecticides are required in sequence, and then always, sort of monitor control in the season and evaluate any, evaluate control to see if you need another application or if there are any sort of signs of, control which is, not satisfactory, always follow up.
Okay. So with Sivanto Prime, do you think that it has kind of filled a gap in the marketplace? Is it something that, is going to offer something that people were struggling with before? I'm guessing, I'm wondering what sets it apart really from anything else.
Yeah, so I guess with aphid control in general, it is quite season specific in terms of weather patterns, etc. But certainly I think it fills a gap as it's another tool. It's a group 4 mode of action, so there are other insecticides with the same mode of action on them available, such as acetamiprid, which is a group 4. However, it's not available in all crops, and in particular it does sort of fill an earlier, it presents itself as a tool for use earlier in some of those crops where we don't have the other insecticide options registered at those earlier timings.
Okay. So thinking about developing products for pulses more generally, obviously it's a smaller market compared to others. What kind of challenges does that pose and opportunities, I suppose?
Yeah, so I suppose in the UK, the pulse market's perhaps smaller than in other countries, but being a sort of global organisation, we are able to sort of transfer any sort of findings from research programs and other crops. So soya, for instance, is obviously a pulse. It's a huge crop sort of produced worldwide. But actually, in the UK, pulses will become sort of a more of a growing market. We need homegrown protein. So where we can, and sort of our R&D program sort of fits, we are looking more at those options. But also we are breeders of pulses as well. So with the Seminis vegetable seeds, we do have breeding programs globally for vegetable beans and peas, sort of the fresh and processing markets. One challenge I would say specifically for the UK sort of growing of pulses is the withdrawal of emus for sort of field beans. That has presented some challenges there. But certainly, working with organisations like PGRO, hopefully we're able to sort of continue working towards emus and the other sort of pulse crops.
Seems like a good opportunity to bring you into this, Becky, and just get your perspective on where we are from a crop protection product availability point of view for pulse crops. We all know there's a challenge with various restrictions and registrations and the withdrawals that we've seen over the years. But how important is a new insecticide for growers, do you think?
This type of insecticide, so Sivanto Prime, I think is really important. It's, as Tom sort of rightly pointed out, it fills a gap. Well, the only products available during that time are pyrethroids, and we know they're at best partially effective for aphid management. And the key really around that is virus management, because it's those early aphids that we start to see from now on that are transmitting viruses to the crop when it's quite small, so early growth stages. So in this particular case, it's for pulse crops, so we're talking about dried combining peas and field beans. It fills what was an empty gap. For vining peas, in terms of resistance management, it's very useful because we've got one other active substance that's available for use in vining peas, for instance, before flowering. But for most legumes, you're talking about that first flowering point being the first time that you can apply a useful aphicide. And in terms of resistance management, it adds another mode of action. You're right to talk about availability of products in pulses. It is a smaller crop than some, and the loss of emus in field beans is more difficult, but we can still apply for emus in peas and some of the other smaller crops. So that's a great help for us, really.
Just for those listeners who aren't quite as familiar with how PGRO interacts with crop protection companies during the research and development stage of new actives, what role does PGRO play? And perhaps in this particular example of Sivanto, what did you see from it in trials?
So we do work closely with the chemical companies. We have long discussions about what the grower priorities are. So we have panels of growers that help us determine what our priorities are, and that's the discussion that we have with people like Tom. We have had Sivanto Prime in trials for a couple of years, and in the sort of latter stages as it comes towards its approval with our efficacy team at PGRO. So we've got a very robust efficacy trials programme at PGRO, which is provided to anybody that's got new products coming through the system. And we're part of the Areto sort of system that means that we're conducting the trials in the right manner. And Sivanto Prime came through trials in 2023 and 2024. And it obviously stands out as being a product that acts very rapidly, has good persistence. And I know Tom mentioned that its persistence is 7 days. It's a systemic product. We have found it can be persistent for longer than that in peas. And the way that our trials work are that we compare them to other products that are available. So we've got our standards, things like the pyrethroids that people might still be using. Other active substances like flunicamide, acetamiprid also go into trials, and alongside perimicarb as well, of course, which is a later aphicide. And it's comparable to certainly the best aphicides that we have currently, and significantly better than pyrethroids, of course. So a good product to have in the toolkit.
So how should Sivanto Prime be used in tandem with IPM principles?
That's a good question. There is quite a bit of sort of previous work that's been done on IPM and aphids. We've got some information on our agronomy guide on the website that people can have a look at in more detail. But there's several tiers, I suppose, in terms of how you might approach integrated management for aphids in particular. The first is looking at prevention. So that might involve things like not putting fields of beans next to other fields of beans so that you're reducing the sort of movement from one crop to another of aphids. Possibly not following crops where you know that you've had overwintering aphids. It's not straightforward, but it can help. Monitoring and decision support is really important. So Tom mentioned the Rothamsted Insect Survey earlier. That starts in the first week of April. So if you go to the Rothamsted Insect Survey, you can see what aphids are flying and when they start to fly. So the key for that is normally in your region, if you see them coming up on the insect survey, it's highly likely that you'll start to see the first few aphids in crops a few days later. And that's important because that really informs how you time your applications, and it gives you the heads up to go and look in the crop yourself, because careful inspection of crops is the key really to managing viruses particularly, and aphid damage by other means. So the aphids themselves are damaging in several ways really. One, they're transmitting viruses early on in the season. They are causing direct feeding damage later in the season to flowers, and they leave honeydew, which is the sort of result of them sap sucking insects, and that can be a focal point for disease infection. So particularly in beans, that might lead to increased chocolate spot. So monitoring and decision support is really important. There are other cultural methods that may help as well. So there's been a fair bit of work done looking at flowering field margins and how they encourage natural predators and beneficial insects that reduce aphid populations in crops. So there's several pieces of work that show the effect of those. But ultimately, if you get to the point where you're above threshold, so we're talking certainly for feeding damage above 10 to 15% of the plants affected. For virus damage, it's much lower. So for virus damage, you're looking at first presence of aphids. So if you know you have viruses in crops, you need to be treating at that first point of entry. Then obviously looking at products like Sivanto Prime and others. But so I think it's the IPM pyramid is really important to keep in mind, and your use of products should be really carefully chosen actually, because as we've talked about earlier, we want to keep these products, we want to make sure they keep working, and overuse of them can lead to resistance happening very, very quickly.
Obviously, farmers are conscious about the amount of product that they're putting on their crops at the moment, and most are probably trying to cut down predominantly for environmental reasons, but I imagine from a business point of view as well, and being mindful of the bottom line. How does Sivanto Prime fit into a grower's programme, and should it be something that they prioritise when they're planning?
It fits really well. It's because it's a targeted aphicide that is very effective and quite persistent. What it will mean is there'll be a reduction of the use of pyrethroids, and that's key, because the pyrethroids may also be causing damage to your beneficial insects and crops. So in fact, actually this will make quite a big difference, I think, in terms of its benefit in the crop. Because it's targeted and effective, it means that the use of other products can be reduced. It will go in at that pre-flowering stage. So yeah.
So Tom, there's some good feedback there from Becky, which I'm sure you'll be pleased about, but you will have already been aware of, I'm sure, from seeing the results in the trials with PGRO. It won't be a surprise for you that this is a fairly positive story by the sounds of it. And do you think this is something that's going to go down quite well with growers, that they've now got it available to use this year?
Yeah, certainly it's another option, isn't it? And yeah, where in seasons where it's required, yeah, certainly I think it will be welcomed.
And have you got any more new products in the pipeline that you're allowed to talk about at the moment, or do you have to remain tight-lipped at the moment?
So yeah, pipelines can be quite dynamic. We don't have anything sort of immediately for sort of the next 3-4 years coming to pulse crops, but we're looking certainly evaluating new fungicides in some of the pulses, but also we're sort of investing more in biopesticides and biostimulant research. So within those, we do have sort of a system now where we sort of evaluate products which are manufactured or developed by other companies. So when we see something suitable, we can pick up, sort of quite agile, and can pick up and sort of implement a more sort of intensive research and sort of R&D program to see where these products fit on the market. So we could have something come in pulses in the meantime.
So I can't miss this opportunity then, Becky. You've got Bayer listening to this. What is it that you think growers most need from a development pipeline from a global R&D company like Bayer? What is it they're crying out for at the moment?
Well, they filled obviously a very big gap actually with Sivanto. There are other gaps. Herbicides, of course, are always key to good crop production, and I think that's an area where we would probably think was a high priority, and possibly beetle pest management, although that is very, very difficult. And I think beetle pest management, growers do sort of solve that problem to a certain extent by choosing different end uses in the case of bruchid control, for instance. And there are cultural techniques, I think, that a lot of them might be using, as well as monitoring for weevil management. So, yeah, I mean, there are a few gaps, but we're positive that crops can be produced well in any event.
Would you agree with that, Tom, from your point of view, as well as the sort of pulse growers that you interact with? Is this the sort of feedback you get from them in terms of what they need and what they're looking for?
Certainly, yeah. I think Becky's spot on there with those sort of issues that have been identified. Certainly, you need to get the crop off to a really good start in terms of weed control. It's only worth investing in if you've got a sufficient plant population there. And yeah, certainly control of beetle pests is becoming more challenging, certainly with the loss of some certain active substances. Something we are sort of working on at the moment in particular is sort of digital trapping, looking at different sort of beetle pests, currently not in pulses, but we're hoping sort of to look more into other crops. And hopefully this can sort of improve targeted use of insecticides to control those pests, beetle pests.
Tom, how do you interact with growers? Do you have much kind of day-to-day discussion with them about things? I'm just wondering how much you are able to interact with them.
In my role, I probably don't have that much direct discussion with growers. However, we have, I think, 13 sort of regional technical managers who are always sort of contactable by phone, email, always they're happy to help. They also sort of in contact with agronomists quite frequently as well. And also we do have a sort of Bayer field days, sort of regional field days. So we have through June and July sort of demonstration events, one in Herefordshire, Norfolk, Yorkshire and Oxford.
Out of interest, how much does Bayer spend on R&D globally every year? Do you have that figure?
It's quite a big figure, yeah. So
yeah, I can imagine.
It's 2.4 billion euros is the annual expenditure on R&D in crop science. So that incorporates research and development into crop protection products, seeds and traits, and digital farming.
And do you have any idea how much is allocated to pulses?
Not off the top of my head, I'm afraid.
I was just wondering what kind of proportion that maybe goes towards pulses, but yeah, that's fair that you don't have that figure off the top of your head.
And I guess when you've discovered an active or something that looks like it's got some potential, you're looking at where it can be applied, and in this case we're sort of looking at pulses and vining peas, for example. But if it's something like Sivanto, it's actually applicable for carrots and potatoes and sugar beet, I think, as well, isn't it, Tom? So you can't necessarily funnel each individual R&D pot into one crop. You're looking for something that's a bit more broad spectrum, something as broad spectrum as possible, I guess. Is that right?
Yes, and also it's more practical on farm. If you've got a product which you can use across multiple crops as well, that certainly has its benefits.
So you've talked about your field days, Tom. Have you got the dates to hand as to when growers might be able to come and see you in person and discuss some of the things we've been talking about today?
Of course, yes. So we have 4 field days this year. The first one is on the 5th of June at Cawood in Yorkshire. The next is on the 26th of June at Callow in Herefordshire, followed by the 30th of June at Hinton in Oxfordshire. And the last day is a new site, which is the Walpoles, and that's on the 3rd of July, and that's in Norfolk. So obviously there's more information available on our website, or just get in touch with one of our technical managers.
Great, and I'm sure, Becky, there's an opportunity to come and talk to the PGRO about IPM, insecticides, and all the other management strategies that you advise on through the organisation. Do you want to do a quick plug for the PGRO Open Day while we've got you on?
Yes, definitely. Our Pulse Open Day at Stubton will be on the 8th of July, between about 10 and 3. But we're there all day for people to come and chat to us, and there'll be lots of information about all of the trials that we're conducting. And not forgetting that we'll also be at Cereals for 2 days in June, and at Groundswell for a couple of days as well. So please come and see us there.
And fingers crossed we've got some of the glorious sunshine that we've recorded this episode in. That's it for today's episode. Thank you very much for joining us, Tom.
Thank you.
And also thanks to Becky for your insights from the PGRO as well.
Thank you.
And thanks to Emily for joining us.
Thank you very much.
If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, please hit the subscribe button and you'll be alerted every time we release a new episode of Inside the Pod. And also, if you could leave us a 5-star review, it does help us reach more listeners. Until next time, thank you very much for listening.